I have a document here in front of me called the Online Content Incident Arrangement Procedural Guidelines. The document's provided to me on Friday under Freedom of Information. It's a document that's been redacted, all 28 pages thereof. This is dated version 1.3 November 2022. Who is this arrangement with?
So that's an internal procedural instruction to our staff about how to go about their engagement with the technology companies, Meta and companies of that nature. Mr Roy will come forward, head of our counter-terrorism centre, so that gives instruction and guidance to our staff. It doesn't form, when you say an arrangement with, it doesn't form a legal or agreement.
But there is an arrangement with social media companies?
There's an arrangement outside of the remit of the Online Safety Act, so I'll just go through this in components. The Parliament, of course, has legislated, in some cases, direct legal powers that fall to the e-Safety Commissioner. She can use powers in very particular circumstances under the Online Safety Act. Some of those assist us in our mission in terms of countering terrorist and violent extremist content, or TVEC to use the acronym. And then a number of agencies and departments that operate in this space where the legal thresholds of the Online Safety Act are not triggered, have got arrangements in place whereby if we see something, for instance, that might not quite fit or meet the thresholds of the Online Safety Act, where we can engage through mutual benefit with those companies to say there's abhorrent material or there's terrorist content or there's extremist content, and according to your own conditions, whether it's Facebook or one of the other major technology providers, you may wish to consider a takedown outside of the remit of the Online Safety Act. And I think it's fair to say, Mr Roy, that that document is a procedural instruction to our own staff about how to both trigger those arrangements and how to go through the steps that are mandated. Okay.
So, and when did this arrangement with social media companies first kick off?
Do you have the history, Mr Roy?
I do, Senator. The OCIA was first established in around...
You might just spell out the acronym on first usage.
Online Content Incident Arrangement was established, I think, in early 2020, in part as a response to the Christchurch attack, where there was a significant online element, as you'll no doubt remember. And so it is, as the Secretary rightly says, a non-binding procedural advice for both Home Affairs staff, but also some other Commonwealth agencies on how to respond.
So you effectively have a backdoor portal to the ear of social media companies to ask them to remove content or to request that they remove content on a range of issues. I accept terrorism. I mean, that's a very legitimate one, of course. But somehow that has drifted into COVID-related posts.
A couple of things, Senator. Firstly, there's nothing sort of backdoor about it. It's an agreement with social media companies to either for the relevant agency, in the case of the e-Safety Commissioner, to refer matters to providers under the e-Safety Commissioner's own powers, or for other agencies to refer directly through a public referral that any citizen can make to social media companies.
So I also asked the question of the numbers of matters that were being referred, and I was told that through a 5-year period, 1 January 17 to 15 December 2022, that's just because that was around the time when I made the FOI request, there were 13,636 referrals to digital platforms. 9,423 related to terrorist and violent extremist related referrals. Okay, fair enough. But 4,213 related to COVID-19 related content. Now, in relation to those, we haven't been provided with any clarification as to what they were. Were any of these referrals relating to matters which have now been debunked and disproved, like, for example, the effectiveness of the COVID vaccines on transmission?
Senator, I would refer to one of my colleagues to deal with the question on COVID referrals, but I do want to clarify that the OCIA is specifically, as the Secretary has noted, in relation to abhorrent violent material or terrorism and extremist violence content.
So why has it drifted into the matter of public health then?
Well, it hasn't. I suspect those things were connected in the FOI response to you, but the OCIA does not deal with matters of COVID referrals.
So the Department of Home Affairs has not been making requests to social media companies?
I might just ask Ms Hawkins from our Strategic Communications area to come forward. There are two different things at play here. In answering very literally, it would seem. The question that you asked, our staff very helpfully, I won't say conflated because that's indicative. They combine two different tracks of activity. The work of the Counter-Terrorism Centre that Mr Roy is the acting head of, that solely and exclusively concerns itself with terrorist and violent extremist content, TVEC. Because we're scanning social media for other purposes, terrorist incidents being live streamed and the like, that if we came across material that, in the Department of Health's view, offended or potentially offended the disinformation and misinformation standards that the technology companies themselves have in place around COVID, that as an assistant or an adjunct to the Department of Health, who doesn't typically, I don't know if they've since built it, a 24/7 referral capability, we would take that on as, if you like, a utility player able to assist the Department of Health. So I just want to distinguish between... Yeah, so I've got that, but what you're describing effectively there is a censorship industrial complex that arises out of the Department of Health, presumably ATAGI, and the Therapeutic Goods Association, directing traffic through the Department of Home Affairs to enforce that? I'm not going to accept the characterisation, because you'll have to ask Mr Hunt what was in his mind when he announced the counter-COVID disinformation and misinformation initiative. We were then funded, as I recall it, Ms Hawkins, to actually... we got dedicated funding subsequent to that early emergency period. So initially, when the Department of Health was mobilising in relation to all sorts of things that were flying around, shall we say, the fringes of the internet, the government of the day was concerned to ensure that citizens, particularly in cultural and linguistic difficulties, but otherwise would have advice from the Department of Health, and because they didn't have a countered misinformation capability of any note, they'd be assisted by the Department of Home Affairs to then trigger these referrals to Facebook and the like to say you might want to consider taking this, I
understand the process. I'm concerned about the concept in the sense that the Department of Home Affairs is effectively, under what you've described, almost the enforcer of various different parts of the narrative from different parts of the department. For example, if people are posting things around, disagreeing with climate alarmism, is the Department of Home Affairs going to interject and ask social media companies for that to be removed as well?
Well, we had a particular role that arose from a Morrison government decision to take a particular, to lean in on COVID dis and misinformation. You use the term enforcer, I just want to be clear. We have no more authority, unless something's triggered under the Online Safety Act, where there are legal powers that are vested in the E-Safety Commissioner. The only thing that we can do is by way of mutual agreement and by way of these approaches to the companies to refer these instances of content to their own terms and conditions.
This requires,
so we enforce nothing.
No, I get that, but this requires your staff to make a value judgment about matters of freedom of speech and then refer them on to others.
I cannot accept that characterisation. The work that we've done in COVID, which is drawing to an end at 30 June, the funding?
It is, Secretary. Yeah.
Is solely driven by the expert advice that we rely upon from the Department of Health. We don't have a separate view on the truth claims about... So if we're asked by the Department of Health, for instance, to look at claims that bleach will, protect you from COVID...
Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about...
Well, I'm not sure what these referrals consist of.
Well, but can you, if you have a spreadsheet of these, can you disclose that?
We can take on notice the types, the instances of the... But they are takedown requests. There's no enforcement powers. They are requests to the company, be it Meta or any of the other companies. And I think I'm right. So Ms Hawkins runs our strategic communications function. Am I right in saying to the Senator, I don't wish to inadvertently mislead, we don't have our own, if you like, scientific unit or our own internal capability to adjudicate on the truth value or the claims that are contained in these referrals. We rely presumably on advice that we take from health.
Secretary, quite right. We're not the arbiter of truth, and of course we have no coercive powers, and we are not in the business of being the arbiter of truth. Facebook, to use an example, Meta has got a policy about mis and disinformation as it relates to COVID, and so we have been working with the platform. We have got a service provider that looks across various platforms. They identify mis and disinformation as it might infringe, for example, Facebook's own policies, and then we provide that to the platform and say, for your consideration against your own policy.
But misinformation in relation to who's, on whose terms? I mean, this is the point, right? We're now seeing a lot of things that were done at the time that are now considered to be incorrect, not disinformation and misinformation, that may or may not have been pulled down at the request of the department. I mean, how does the department, still going on, assess posts for misinformation or disinformation? How is that done? How are they identified?
As I said to you, we have a service provider that we have contracted to do it. We then look at the proposed referrals that they provide to us. We look at the policy, like I'll just keep using the example of Facebook, as they are the platform to whom we made the most referrals. We look at how those posts actually fit with Facebook's own mis and disinformation COVID policy, and then we make the referral. So the Department of Home Affairs
is the whistleblower for big tech censorship.
Well, I wouldn't characterise it as that, Senator.
You're using the tools to identify posts that don't fit within the regime's narrative when they may not be they may be totally wrong.